This is not what I expected to wake up to today. I was up really late last night working on the last video, actually the review to this lens, the 180-600 by Nikon. And the weather earlier in the week called for snow on yesterday, Saturday. But then the weekend came along and they said it was just going to rain. Not do this. We're already at like a little over 3 inches or 4 inches of snow already. Just incredible, but it is gorgeous. I love the winter in Alaska. So much more fun shooting animals, especially if I can find fox or something that's a brighter red or darker color. It just looks great in the snow, really cool. Or even white ptarmigan, white on white's pretty cool too. What are we doing here today? Well, I've got a lot of comments, a lot of questions about the Canon RF 200-800 lens at f9. And rather than type out a lot of replies or reply to a bunch of emails and messages and comments and stuff like that, why don't I just make a video talking about my thoughts on this lens, because that's what everybody keeps asking. What are your thoughts on the lens? What do you think about that aperture? What do you think the image quality is going to be like? Is it too heavy? Is it too light? And am I going to get the lens? All those types of things. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Thinking about going somewhere where it's covered, but I guess I'll just get snowed on when we talk about it. So firstly, do I think it's going to be a good lens? Well, Canon really hadn't put anything really bad. Neither is Nikon, and neither is Sony as far as lenses go. Any lens you get a hold of anymore is going to be a great lens. They're all extremely sharp lenses. Even the Canon RF 100-400, which is a $700 lens, takes superb pictures, great, gorgeous pictures. My uncle, that's the lens he uses with the Canon R7, and he gets phenomenal images of hummingbirds and flycatchers and all that kind of stuff. And who's up here, great images with that lens. It is really sharp. I reviewed the lens also. I may even pick it back up again. It's just a little throw in the truck, run and go lens sitting on the R8 or the R7, just sitting there in the truck all the time. So the first thing I think, as far as sharpness and stuff, the lens is going to be great. The next thing is talking about the weight. Well, 4.5 pounds, that's the weight of that lens. Well, I'll tell you what, this Nikon 180-600 here, 6.3 by Nikon, that is fantastic. The video just dropped recently. This lens is 4.3 pounds, and the body on this is a lot heavier than an R5 or an R7. This body on this thing is 3.9 pounds. It's really, really heavy, 4 pounds. And the Canon, you know, the R7, it's 1.5 pounds or so, so it's pretty light. So if you're running the R7 with that lens at 800 millimeters, you're like at 1260 or something like that on effective focal range. Just insane distance, insane distance. So I don't think the weight, to me, is really that big a deal. Let's talk about the length of the lens. Well, the lens, I believe, without the lens hood, before it's telescope, because this is a externally zooming lens, not an internally zooming lens like this lens is, it's 12.5 inches. Guess what the length of this lens is with that lens hood? It's 12.5 inches. They're exactly the same size as the RF is folded up versus this 180-600. So that's fairly decent length. Now, of course, when you extend that lens, it's going to get longer. And that leads to the next thing about that lens. The only thing I don't like about it, it's not that I don't like about it, I'd rather not have, I guess I should say that better, is I prefer an internally zooming lens. Not because of dust, not because of the weather sealing and all that stuff. We'll talk about weather sealing in a second. It's not because of that, it's because when I do gimbal work, if I've got this lens that's internally zooming on the gimbal, and I've got it balanced here, it's always going to stay balanced once I get it balanced, because there's no extra movement of weight on the back end or the front end. That's why you balance. You get that just like a teeter-totter. You get two people the same weight or the same weight, it'll sit there and sit still. So with a lens that extends, once you extend it, you're adding more weight to this end. So what happens is on a gimbal, you nose dip. So how do you overcome that if you're on a gimbal? Let's say you've got that externally zooming lens. It's going to extend out, so you're going to add weight down here on this end. Well, what you do is, if you know what focal range you're going to be focusing, because usually on a gimbal you kind of know how far your subject is from you and what kind of focal range you're probably going to want. So what I would do with that lens, I'd probably move it out to 600 or 800, wherever I'm going to be, and then balance it, and then try to keep that focal range, and know if I come back to a shorter range, to say 400, I know I need to keep hold of the back of this because it's going to dip down this way, because now your weight's going to shift more towards the back the front end is going to get lighter, is basically what I'm saying. Now, let's get into the elephant in the room. And I got to get my hood up because I'm getting a wet head here out in the snow. But let's get the elephant in the room, like I was saying. And that is that aperture, the f9. I've had so many comments, people asking about, it's at f9. I can't lose at f9, f9. Well, let's talk about f9. And I'll give you an example about aperture. So with aperture, what you're looking with your apertures, one is your light gathering. We'll talk about that in a bit. The first part we'll talk about is about depth of field and compression. So the longer your lens is, your compression changes. It is shorter. The distance. The closer you are to your subject and the closer you are, your depth of field shrinks. The farther away your subject is from you, your depth of field increases as that focal hits that spot, right? So you'll want to get closer to it so you get better bokeh, right? And as your aperture decreases, that depth of field also decreases. So the closer you can get, the lower your aperture is. On a longer focal length, the tighter your depth of field is. So at 800 millimeters, your depth of field is already getting pretty narrow the closer you get to your subject, because it's a longer focal range. And at f9, it's not that big at 800 millimeters, depending on where you are from your subject. And if I've got a subject a little farther away, or really close to me a lot of times, I'm not shooting f4 with 500 f4. I'm probably shooting f8. Why is that? Well, if I'm shooting f4 and the subject's not that far from me, and I'm shooting at 500 millimeters, my depth of field is inches. Very, very small. I even had it where I've got sandpipers closer to me at f4, where if I have the eye, the beak is out of focus in the back of the head. You're talking a bird that head is probably not a couple inches or an inch and a half long anyway on a little sandpiper, rock sandpiper, or western sandpiper, any of that type of stuff. So I shoot f8 so I can get the full head of the bird and a little bit of the body. I'm probably still going to miss the tail at f8 if they're closer to me. So f9 to me is not that big an issue. It's not. The next part about f9, let's talk about that with other lenses. F9 is in line with all the other lenses that are on the market right now. And I'll tell you why it actually is better than the 1-500 here in a second. But let's look at the Tamron and Sigma, or even this lens here, the 180-600 by Nikon. Their max aperture is all at 6.3. All right? So if you put a 1.4 extender on there, and you're trying to get closer to this 800 millimeters with that other lens, I was going to point to this one, I don't have it. It's going to be 840 with a 1.4 extender. What's your aperture? It's f9. It's exactly the same aperture. You're getting 40 extra millimeters of those lenses with a 1.4 extender, but you're getting out there. Now the other part about it is, now you've added an extender onto it with a zoom lens, sometimes you need to stop down. So now you're at f11 after f9. So, or f13, can't remember which, right off the top of my head. But so that's that with those. So basically you see that basically now you don't have a teleconverter affecting that, where sometimes you need to stop down on a 6.3 lens if you put a 1.4 extender on it. So you're actually as good or better with f800 and f9 already with those lenses. Now let's look at the 1-500. Now we don't know what the glass is going to look like. We don't know what the color rendition on that lens is going to look like. The best video I've seen so far on the review on that lens by Pangolin Wildlife, and Janine on that channel, she did a phenomenal job talking about even some of these subjects I'm talking about here. Great review of the lens, probably the best one I've seen out there so far. And those pictures that they had on that video were really nice. All the images I've seen so far from that look really good. Now let's get back to the 1-500. We stick a 1.4 extender on it, on the 1-500. What is our focal range now? 700 millimeters. Well, that's 100 less than the new lens that's coming out, 700 versus 800. So right there, you're gaining better compression and depth of field at 800 than 700 because of the focal range. Now what's your aperture? If you're at 7.1, you're going to one stop up. What is that? That's f10 on that lens. Now, you're at f10, 700 millimeters, you're f9 at 800 millimeters. Who has a better depth of field? Who has a better compression? It's going to be the new RF 200 to 800. It's going to have better depth of field and better compression. Again, it's really going to boil down to how good is the glass, how good is the color rendition of that glass. That's the only thing we don't really know yet until we get our hands on it. What is the focus going to look like and the sharpness going to look like at 800 and what's going to look like at 200? That's another thing we need to know. We don't really know those things yet because these folks reviewing the pre-production lens can't go and tell you that yet. They can just tell you it looks good. That's all they can really tell you. They really can't even share the images. Now, Pangolin did share images more than everybody else did, so that's pretty nice. So that's why I'm saying that the f9 to me is in line with all the other lenses, or it actually beats the other lenses. Because like I said, the 600s at 6.3, your stick extender on it, you really got to stop down. So you're probably going to be over f9 on those lenses. And this one at f10, if you have to stop down on that one, yuck. You're even more, you're going even farther out. So that's why I said the f-stop to me is not that big an issue. So why did Canon make that at f9? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One was cost. The lens is $18.99. If they made it better, like 6.3, that lens could be $4,000 or $5,000. Second thing is weight. If it was 6.3 or lower, that lens could weigh, it's already 4.5 pounds, it could weigh 6 pounds or 7 pounds. And the last thing is the size. If you've got a more light gathering, you got to make that much bigger as far as the front end of that lens. So the lens is going to get bigger, it's going to get longer, or it's going to get wider, one of the two. So that's the reason. So for them to put it at 6.3, the lens would have been one of the big L glasses and way too expensive. So this is an affordable, if you say $18.99 is affordable zoom lens. So those are the things why I think this lens is going to be a really good lens. I think it's going to sell like crazy. I mean, 2 to 800, there's nothing else on the market as far as Canon goes that Canon makes that can compete with that at f9 without putting a teleconverter on it and getting out there at a less aperture, more weight, those types of things. So I think the lens is going to be great. And finally, am I going to buy the lens? I've already pre-ordered. When I heard that it was going to be November 2nd announcement from Canon, I went ahead and down there and talked to Bill and Brian. I said, hey guys, if you've got a list for the 2 to 800, stick me on it because I think it's going to be announced, so I want it. And usually, I'm not the first guy that's done that, but I got lucky that I'm the first guy on the list. So we'll see if I get it in December. Hopefully I'll get that thing in December, we'll start reviewing it. I'm looking forward to that lens. I think it's going to be cool. I think it's going to be really cool to compare it against this 180-600 from Nikon, which is fantastic. I mean, if it gets even close to this as far as image quality and all that stuff, it's going to be a fantastic lens. It's a great lens. Now, the last part about f9 is light gathering. I almost forgot to talk about that. So yes, at f9, light gathering is an issue. So if you're shooting at dark, dusk, twilight, you're going to drop that shutter speed down to 1/600, 200, somewhere in there, and you're probably going to be shooting 4,000 to 5,000, 6,000 ISO. Now, if you watch the video I just did on this lens right here, I was shooting at 6.3 though, but I was shooting at 200, 8,000 ISO on the first image you see, especially those ones of the Fox. Some of those were 8,000, 10,000 ISO. Tell me you can see the noise in those images. All I did was I pre-processed all my images through DxO to get the best color profile, the lens profile, and a little bit of noise reduction. And I don't even have the sharpening turned on that. So that has made it fantastic. So yes, you're gonna have to watch that. The second thing you have to watch about is your backgrounds and your bokeh. So as you're shooting, you want to make sure you get low or get more separation. So separation is your issue at f9, but those are the only drawbacks. But I even shot the f11 video that I shot last year to show you that you can get fantastic backgrounds if you just have to think about it a little bit more. You also think about your light. And yeah, there'll be times where you really just can't shoot f9. I doubt it. Put it on a tripod, drop that shutter speed down to 1/100th, hope your emerald doesn't move, and fire away. I think you'll be fine. It's going to be a fantastic lens. It's going to sell a lot of copies. It's going to sell a lot of copies for Canon. I think it's a great lens. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that answers a lot of questions. That's just my thoughts. I could be completely wrong, but that's the way I see it. That's the way I shoot. That's what I'm doing. So yes, I've ordered the lens. When I get it, we'll review it. We'll see how it goes. So as always, guys, like, subscribe, think about becoming a member, and get up here to Alaska to enjoy this beautiful snow here. It is gorgeous. So I'm going to go out and see what I can find as far as animals in the snow. And probably get back to the house before it dips too much colder. It's actually about 28 degrees right now, so it's not too bad. There's no wind. That's why these trees look just so gorgeous right now. See what I can find in the snow, and until next time, guys, get outside and go run that shutter.